So as a scholarly authority, PokeRap versus DigiRap, what's better? I'm a huge fan of series like The Toys That Made Us and books like Console Wars, Sega Nintendo, and The Battle That Defined a Generation. Those true stories about the real world events that resulted in the pop culture that we loved growing up. Mainly because as kids you never thought about where the media you consumed came from. It just showed up on the TV one day and the next thing you knew, Pokemon and Digimon are the most important things in your very small world. As a 90s kid, I have an intense nostalgia for that 1998 to 2003-ish time period, that sweet spot when Pokemon absolutely took over the world, and then series like Digimon, Cardcaptors, Medabots, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Showed up just hit after hit. It was awesome. So when I learned that a book was being written that documented that time period and would dive deep into the making of all these series that I loved, I was incredibly interested. Monster Kids: How Pokemon Taught a Generation to Catch Them All is a brand new book that tells the story of that nostalgic era, informed by dozens of first-hand interviews with the people in Japan and America who brought franchises like Pokemon and Digimon to a worldwide audience. I was lucky enough to get a chance to chat with the book's author, Daniel Dockery, and ask all the questions that I thought you would like to hear answered from someone who literally wrote the book on Digimon, Pokemon, Monster Rancher, and more. So not to spoil the book, but what was kind of the biggest revelation you had while researching and writing Monster Kids?
The biggest revelations I had while I was researching and interviewing for Monster Kids is that, Pokemon and Digimon and all these other franchises that came out when I was in around 5th grade, they came out in America around that time. And they came out in massive fashion very suddenly, very quickly. So just to find out how, in more depth, how they were localized and presented and packaged, and how the whole kind of Pokemania craze was both a product of underestimating how popular it would be and also kind of engineered to be as big as possible.
I'm mostly known here on YouTube for talking about Digimon, and I think others will want to ask you plenty about Pokemon, so a lot of my questions will be about Digimon. What do you think people get most wrong about Digimon?
I think the thing that people get most wrong about Digimon was that it was some kind of like Pokemon knockoff, and that kind of pervaded in pop culture on a mass scale. The fact that a lot of people just kind of accepted it as fact that, oh, Pokemon was popular, so they made Digimon. And while these franchises kind of drive strength from the same watering hole, especially, thematically and in the culture of the time, Digimon is a very different beast from Pokemon. And it emerges during the same time period, but, while it shares some threads, it's much different. When it came to marketing, Sweep was inspired by Pokemon, and the ways that it was and the ways that it wasn't are super interesting. But it's still kind of a comparison that to this day means that anytime someone talks about Digimon, they're expected to talk about Pokemon in relation to it. And while I guess there's some merit to that, it's kind of like that Digimon is definitely strong enough to stand on its own.
What was the hardest part about researching and writing this book covering the late 90s? The internet was online, obviously, but it wasn't what it is today.
Yeah, I'd say that probably the lack of documentation around that time period might have been the biggest hurdle, because it's out there, but the internet of 2022 is very different from the internet of like 1998, 1989. A lot of the articles, especially news articles announcing stuff, are kind of either deep in the Wayback Machine or they're just non-existent. The sites don't exist anymore. Yeah, there was definitely times when I'd hear about like something really cool, and then I'd have to go back and be like, okay, well, who originally said this? Where is this originally from? That's kind of frustrating as a researcher.
People will often say stuff like Pokemon kind of ate Digimon's lunch, that Pokemon won, quote unquote, but let me ask you, in a timeline where Pokemon just never existed, does Digimon do better or worse than it did in our timeline? Like, would it actually do better if Pokemon wasn't around?
In terms of whether or not Digimon would have done better without Pokemon's existence, it's kind of hard. Especially in America, Digimon was often kind of seen as either the alternative or kind of the stepping stone from Pokemon. Like when you graduate from Ash Ketchum's adventures, you go on to, enjoy like the Digidestiny. One thing that Digimon kind of lacked, especially when it came here, was that it lacked Pokemon's branding. Pokemon's branding, and I talk about this a lot in the book, was strong to the extent that every aspect of the series, whether it's the trading cards or the toys or whatever, kind of served as a commercial for everything else. So everything was a natural gateway to the next thing. And Digimon sadly never really had that. Every aspect of Digimon was kind of too often treated in isolation. I think Digimon's popularity was, to be honest, was going to be what it's going to be with what it had. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
And following that up, Digimon is often praised for reinventing itself with almost every series, with almost every game, always kind of rewriting the rules. That's often seen as a good thing by the fans, but do you think that maybe actually hurt it in terms of mainstream understanding or accessibility?
I think Digimon's constant approach in the anime and sometimes in the games of this pseudo reinvention, I think it's really cool. I definitely think it's one of the positives of the franchise. I imagine it's very, very frustrating to like marketers and licensors and the people that have to promote the things sometimes, to be like, okay, well, by the end of the year there's going to be a whole new cast of main characters that you have to promote and figure out a way to promote, and then by the time that you've got that master down, the year passes, and then there's another different set of kids and different set of monsters. And I know for a fact that got pretty that if you were trying to keep the ship on course and get everything sold, that it would be a little bit anxiety inducing to know that in 2 episodes it's going to be an entirely new thing.
You recently watched through a ton of Digimon to write Monster Kids, so what do you think is the best Digimon series as a published author on this subject?
I think if we're talking about anime, I think it's been said a lot before, but I think Digimon Tamers is probably the best one overall. But more and more, I think the original Digimon Adventure might be it's pretty neck and neck, especially because Adventure encapsulates a lot of I think the ethos that kind of drive the franchise, and its ending of taking this kind of what is essentially the summer vacation and providing this bittersweet message about growing up by the time it ends, I think it's just phenomenal. It's got so much empathy for how hard growing up is, that I think that and Tamers, they're pretty neck and neck, endlessly rewatchable.
So as a scholarly authority, PokeRap versus Digirap, what's better?
So I know that this is a Digimon YouTube channel, but I am sorry, but the PokeRap is the superior one. I'm not a huge fan of the Digirap. I kind of like the song without it, to be honest. But that's just me.
And where did you get the idea for the book? You're definitely filling a void. I think we were lacking a proper telling of the Pokemania era, but how did this begin for you?
The origin story for this project happened around 2016. I was playing Pokemon Sun in my local laundromat, waiting for my laundry to get done. I began to think about the number of books that had actually tackled the monster collecting and monster taming genres. While there had been some, they hadn't really been books that I particularly liked a lot. I felt like I could bring some new stuff to the material. So after working through the idea and how it was structured a few times, I decided to write Monster Kids. And I think it works best as a book rather than a series of articles or something like that, is that there's a lot of interweaving and a lot of information that kind of needs to be presented together, that can only really be done, at least with my know-how and what I think I'm good at in book form.
So from that time period, the 1999 to 2003-ish, what franchise do you think was most slept on or deserved more praise?
So I think a series that has been slept on. The obvious answer is Medabots, because Medabots is this this really well staffed production that has these really cool character models and really kinetic animation at times, and the battle sequences are pretty awesome, and the series can get a little bit intense sometimes, so it's really fun to go back and rewatch. The other one, I'd also say, if you get the chance to rewatch Monster Rancher, if only because the story is kind of cool. Yeah, I had to rewatch it for writing the book, and I was surprised by how much Monster Rancher has held up. It's a really fun show.
Daniel, thanks for taking the time. Everyone, I genuinely recommend the heck out of Monster Kids. I read through it and loved it. Fun fact, Veronica Taylor, aka the original voice of Ash Ketchum, does the audiobook, which still blows my mind. Daniel, one more time, if you want to tell us about the book.
Monster Kids, How Pokemon Taught a Generation to Catch Them All, coming out wherever books are sold on October 4th, 2022.